Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Despite all the good economic news on TV and in the newspapers, every year St. Louis families are forced to seek debt protection offered by bankruptcy court. Many other families lose their homes because of a foreclosure action taken by their mortgage company. Our guest today is Andrew Kirkwood Smith. Mr. Smith is an attorney who specializes in consumer bankruptcy. Since opening his practice, he has filed more than 1,500 bankruptcies for clients. Today, we will be discussing consumer debt, bankruptcy, foreclosure on real estate, and what you can do to protect yourself from creditors if you have lost your job or your family income has been dramatically reduced. We will also discuss how you can recover following foreclosure and/or bankruptcy. Andrew Kirkwood Smith, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee. Great to be here.
So you're providing quite a service to people, even though they may not see it as a service.
You know, they come into my office a lot of times with the stress and the baggage of just years of harassment, and you know, it gives them that opportunity to get that, you know, cliched fresh start that everyone talks about, and it really helps get people in the right direction.
Well, of the 1,500 that you have dealt with, what's the usual case study look like?
So a lot of times we see credit card debt being very common. Medical bills are very common. Then you get the occasional repossession, things like that in regards to the debt. What normally gets individuals in this situation is unexpected occurrences. A lost job, you know, switching to a different job that maybe pays less, or gaining a job that pays less, or having children that increase expenses. You know, it's usually something that they don't expect, and it just hits them hard, and so they use credit cards or other means to try to get them back, and it just kind of creates a problem.
So people are they're assuming that by using the credit cards that somehow that things are going to right themselves, and that the debt that they're running up is going to be able to be paid off.
Yeah, one of the most common things I hear is, I thought I could dig myself out of it. It's very common that, you know, there's ups and downs, but usually, you know, people are able to have some hard times and then get back in control of things. And to some degree, just trying to make minimum payments feels like you're in control, but if you slip just a little bit, you know, they'll stop the credit, they'll cancel the cards, and then the balances just go through the roof.
Well, you said making minimum payments. I'm thinking about the people who start to use the credit card as a substitute for income.
Absolutely.
What would you advise people who wind up with these unexpected medical bills, or a loss of a job, or loss of a part of their income? Maybe the wife or the husband loses a job and they're no longer a two-income family. What do you recommend that they do from the very first moment?
So I think from the very first moment, they got to recognize that there's an issue that they need to address. And just trying to maintain the status quo of making payments on everything might not be that best situation. You know, when you have an unexpected medical bill, it's worth going to the hospital when you get that bill to talk to them about options that they have to get that bill reduced. Oftentimes people,
and they do that, don't they?
They do.
People don't realize that just because you've got a big bill doesn't mean that the hospital isn't willing to help out.
Right, and if you let it go, sometimes these debts will get sold to third parties, and they're much less likely to
be friendly
about it. So, you know, I would say the moment something like that happens, attack it aggressively. What's happens that I think is kind of unfortunate is sometimes people lose a job, but when their income's reduced, they keep trying to maintain all of their expenses to every single credit card or other repayment they may have towards the debt, thinking that they're going to get another job quickly. And what happens is they run out of their savings, and they still don't have that job. Right. And that's when things really come crashing down.
Now, as to the credit card company, that's a big one right there, where people have credit card debt. What can be done like you said, go to the hospital and say, hey, you know, I'm having problems here being able to pay this, can you help me out? Is there some mechanism that people can follow to do the same thing with credit card companies?
There is, except it depends on the amount of debt you have with the credit card companies. If, let's say, you just have one credit card and you build up a large balance, several thousand, you can go to them and say, look, I'm experiencing a financial hardship. Can I have a deferred month or two, or can we set up payments where you don't hike my interest up to 30% due to a missed payment? Because what happens so often is that, you know, you build it up, and then if you don't make a payment, you know, the balances start to skyrocket, your available credit drops, and it kind of paralyzes you. So I think having a conversation that I need some help early on is helpful. The problem is if you have debt spread through several credit cards and other loans, they're going to see that too, and so they may be less willing to try to work something out.
I see. Now, of course, people are getting in the mail these pieces of paper from the credit card companies that say, oh, well, here's our current set of rules. And then people just promptly look in the envelope and then they toss it out. But if they look in there, they'll see that there are rules that say, hey, if you're more than 30 days late, we have the option of upping your interest rate. Isn't that right?
Significantly.
Significantly,
I mean,
yeah. You might be paying like 16, and the next thing you know, you mentioned 30, but it could even go higher than that.
Correct. And then, you know, what happens is, in addition to that, they will drop your credit limit. So if you have a $5,000 limit and you're sitting at around $4,000 used on that credit limit and you miss some payments, they may drop your credit down to the amount you have as a balance.
Right.
What that means,
which means you can't use your card anymore.
Can't use it, then the interest takes hold, and if it was tough to make the minimum payment, well, that minimum payment just got higher.
Mm-hmm. Because the difference between 16% interest and 30% interest is significant.
Right, and a lot of cards will have incentives where, you know, it'll be no interest for a period of time if you're making your payments. But where they get you is if you miss a payment, that benefit goes out the window.
Now let's examine something that's even more critical to people, and that's their home. Okay, people buy a home based upon a current income. They're granted this mortgage based upon the fact that they're expecting, the mortgage company expects to be repaid every month faithfully a certain amount of money for a certain amount of years. And then all of a sudden this thing happens, like the medical emergency, or one or the other family member loses income, or both of them lose income, right? Okay, so now you're in the predicament where you can't make a full mortgage payment. Now what?
So the first thing is you want to contact the mortgage company, and if you fall several months behind, talk to them about their modification options. Most mortgage companies have in-house modification options where they take the amount you're behind and they put it on the back of the loan, or there are some government programs as well. The problem is if you get too far behind, mortgage companies will no longer accept a payment here and a payment there. They'll say, you know, you're 5 months behind, we need the whole amount.
Right.
And
it's 5 months worth of mortgage payments now, otherwise you're in default, right?
Right, and that's when people run into problems, because let's say they were making their mortgage payment without a problem. One person loses their job for, let's say, 3 or 4 months. They fall behind on the mortgage. That individual gets reemployed, and now they can make their mortgage payments. Problem is, sometimes mortgage companies will say, hey,
too late,
you need to get us the full amount, or else we're going to move forward with the foreclosure. And in that situation, that's where filing a Chapter 13 bankruptcy can help try to protect the consumer.
But you said that if they act proactively, from the very first moment when they know they've got the problem, if they go to the bank, they can maybe fix this during this period when the one spouse is out of a job and they're expecting that this person is going to get a job.
Mortgage companies don't want to foreclose your house immediately. You know, it's better for them if they have somebody paying that mortgage.
Right.
The ideal scenario is, of course, you know, you fall behind as a result of some event happening, but you restabilize and request that modification. In that sense, a mortgage company, if they see that you have the means to continue to make those payments, you know, they may very well be able to work with you.
These mortgage companies, they want to own money and notes. They don't want to own property.
Right, especially if they foreclose on a property and then people move out and the property is just sitting there.
Right.
Then you have the risk of it being vandalized and other things.
They got to winterize it, they've got to mow the lawn, they have to pay the taxes. So it's a big deal for these mortgage companies, so they really do want to work with you. But you said something about a modification. It turns out, I've heard, that some people believe that they are getting a modification from the bank because one department of the bank is saying, oh yes, but other departments in there are actually moving towards a foreclosure. You've heard of this, you've seen this happen.
Unfortunately, the problem that you see is that banks simultaneously might be working on a modification and moving forward towards the foreclosure process. And sometimes to the consumer, it might feel like the right hand of the bank doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because you'll call and you'll talk to one person at the bank and they'll say, yep, we got what we need, we're reviewing it. Then you call again and they might say, oh wait, we need these updated documents. Or you're just kind of in a holding pattern. And then you might get a letter from a law firm saying, we're intending to move forward with the foreclosure. And that's a real problem, because if you get caught up thinking everything's okay, your mortgage company's going to work with you, and all of a sudden they tell you we're going to foreclose in the next 60 days. That's tough.
So then I've heard that the next step that someone can take to protect themselves so they don't wind up with a foreclosure on their bureau reports is to do what's called a short sale?
Correct.
What is that?
So a short sale is, they use the word short because you're working out an agreement to sell the property for a short amount, less than what is actually owed on the property.
Meaning principal and interest.
Correct, and whatever fees they may have accumulated.
And so they're willing to let the property be sold to someone else to get it off their books for less than all that money that they think that they're going to get over the years.
Right, and that becomes a good option for people to kind of allow themselves to get out of the property when they either can't afford it anymore or just other circumstances change. But then it requires, proving what the market value is at that time and having the bank agree, and then getting a buyer, and all these things have to fit together to be able to do that. And sometimes you don't have enough time to do that. You might say, okay, it looks like I can't get caught up, let's try a short sale. Well, now there might be a foreclosure pending in 30 to 60 days.
Right. So going back to what you were saying before, some people may think that they're getting a modification. They may think this for a number of months. These are critical months. And when all of a sudden they discover, oh, I was being told one thing by one branch of the bank when in fact that's not true, and they're actually seriously going to be foreclosing on the property, that becomes a real problem, because they could have acted during that critical period.
Right, and
instead of hoping for the best.
Right, and I think you said it well, hoping for the best, because you figure, okay, I'm making that effort to get it modified, and it's just kind of pending, and you just kind of assume it's going to work out, but it doesn't. And that's where a Chapter 13 bankruptcy can allow you to take whatever you're behind and make a court payment and keep your house where it stops a foreclosure sale.
We'll get to that in one moment. I wanted to just check one other item here off before we go to that. And that is, if you don't wind up in bankruptcy court, but the house still gets taken from you, that's a bad mark on your credit bureau, right?
Correct. A foreclosure does put a pretty big hit on that.
Like a 10-year, or I don't know, some number of years that people are looking at you like, uh-oh, you're bad. But if you do the short sale, that's not the same kind of a hit, is it?
It's not the same. It's a hit. It's a hit, but it's not as bad of a hit. And in addition, on some short sales, you could have it so where you, the homeowner, will not owe any deficiency balance, and you'll be relieved of any financial liability on the property. It lets you walk away without looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, you mentioned this term deficiency balance. People don't understand that if they let their house go to foreclosure and the bank sells the property and the amount that they make is less than what's owed, technically you owe the difference, don't you? Over the years, if you haven't gone to bankruptcy court.
It depends on the type of foreclosure, but certain mortgage lenders do go after deficiency balances, particularly if you have a second mortgage, where the second mortgage, maybe you took out a home equity line and they're getting shorted. Second mortgages are the most common group to come after somebody for a deficiency balance.
Okay, so now we come to the point where all hope is lost of being able to recover from this disaster, this financial disaster, and so then you wind up in your office.
That's right.
Okay, now you mentioned the term Chapter 13. Is this one of many options, or is this the only option?
There are two types of bankruptcies for consumers. There's a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 13. A Chapter 13 is the kind of a repayment bankruptcy, although that may be misleading. You might not be paying any of your debt back through that plan. But that's the option where if you have to stop a foreclosure and you're trying to save your house, Chapter 13 allows a plan where you repay the arrearage on your house through the court while you then make your ongoing payments on your mortgage. Mm-hmm. And that can allow you to keep your house when maybe the mortgage company is not willing to work with you.
Mm-hmm. And then this Chapter 7 is?
Chapter 7 is the more common bankruptcy. That's the, they call it a liquidation bankruptcy, although that is misleading because oftentimes you don't actually lose any property. Chapter 7 allows you to get rid of any medical bills, credit cards, personal loans, payday loans, a whole variety of debt.
But not student loans, right?
Not student loans, and there have been moves by other other areas of the country to try to loosen the grip of non-dischargeability on student loans, but it's unfortunately it's something that it's very hard to get rid of.
Now, many states allow for, I don't know, it's called homestead rights or something like that, where you can you can keep your house if you can make payments from that point forward, or you know what I'm talking about?
Right.
Or am I just babbling here?
No. So that in a Chapter 13, that is the case where you have it takes what you're behind and then you make your payments moving forward. But
in 13, not in the set. In
right.
7, you're going to give up the house?
Not necessarily. So you normally keep your property in Chapter 7 as long as you don't have too much equity in your property. Every state has different exemptions which allow for different amount of equity in your vehicles, what you have in your bank account, and your property. In Missouri, for example, you can have $15,000 worth of equity in your house after a hypothetical cost of sale. Mm-hmm. So as long as there's not too much equity, if you file a Chapter 7, you're not risking your property.
Mm-hmm. And in Chapter 7, though, all the, except for student loans, all the other debts, like you said, medical, credit card, cable TV bills,
right.
Utility, in other words, utility bills, all of these things can be written off.
Correct.
By the court.
And the benefit to my clients and people in this situation is that they have years of just pent up stress. I mean, it's very stressful getting phone calls. I mean, people will be called 20, 30 times a day by different creditors. Mm-hmm. They won't answer their cell phones anymore unless they recognize the number. Mm-hmm. They're being harassed by the phone calls, the mail, and just always worrying about how they're going to pay this and pay that. So
can I ask you a quick question here? Isn't there a rule that if you tell a creditor, don't call this number, that they're required not to? Or is that just wives' tale?
My understanding is that if it's a third-party creditor, so a debt buyer, if you inform them that you've hired an attorney, they can no longer call you. I think if it's, and I'm not 100% sure on that, but if it's an original creditor, I think they have the legal right to call you.
I see. Okay.
So it's not necessarily, hey, don't call me, that they have to stop. I think they can still move forward.
Yeah, I mean, you call them and say, I got the message.
Yeah.
There's no sense in you calling me anymore. It's not going to change anything.
What I find is a lot of people tell me that they'll get a call every 3 days from a creditor, and they'll tell the same thing. Nothing's changed. And they'll say, well, can't you pay $300, $400 a month? No, because they have 10 people asking them that.
Right.
And that's where it gets stressful.
People are probably saying, I've got to feed the family.
Right, and that's the reality is that when tough times hit, credit cards can be a nice buffer in that sense. If you have to pay an electric bill, you have to buy food, and that's completely understandable. But sometimes it gets to a point where it gets out of control, and it's just not feasible to continue that route. And that's where bankruptcy can really, especially Chapter 7, allow for that fresh start, because once you file once it's over, it's 3 months, and you're all of a sudden all that stress and all these letters, all these calls, they stop. And that I get a lot of people that say, I wish I'd done it earlier.
Now, what happens to people afterwards? I guess what I'm asking is, a lot of people feel that it's a scarlet letter.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm a bankrupt now. Nobody's going to love me. Nobody's going to give me any credit, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about, is that true or is that not true?
It's funny, I hear that a lot, that people are concerned that, well, how will bankruptcy affect me, and is this going to ruin my finances for forever? And the reality is that normally if you're in a position for bankruptcy, your credit's already shot. It's taken a big hit due to
non-payment, right. You didn't pay your credit card, you didn't pay your mortgage, your bureau pretty much shows that you're not a very good risk.
Right, so what the bankruptcy will do is it'll stop that negative reporting moving forward. And your credit score, 35% is based on payment history, 30% is based on credit utilization. Well, normally if you're filing a bankruptcy, you've extended all of your credit. That hurts your credit score. Once you file a bankruptcy, all of that debt is wiped out. It allows you to begin getting new credit once your case is completed, and at that point you don't have all the negative reporting, so that stops, and you can have better debt ratios, which in turn will turn that score around.
But what you just said requires that you actually have income. It's not like somebody who has no income, files bankruptcy, is suddenly going to be creditworthy.
Correct, and it's not so much having the income, it's also taking that step to try to rebuild the credit. Because sometimes people think if you have 0 credit cards and 0 reporting that your credit score is going to be really high. The reality is that if you don't have that credit history, you won't have the credit.
Now there are credit card companies that specialize in dealing with post-bankrupt people. They'll give you a credit card with a very high interest rate, but if you buy stuff with it and you make your payments on you pay off every single month, you get credit on the bureau, don't you, for a payment every month?
You do, and that helps. And I normally recommend that clients go to what's called a secured credit card. And what that is that the bank uses money in a savings account as collateral if you miss a payment. It protects the consumer because if you, for some reason, miss that payment, they will have the funds to be able to satisfy the charges that you ran up. So it allows people to start rebuilding there, and then you could get maybe a gas card or a clothing store card, something to slowly rebuild that credit.
And also, I understand that if you go, or at least it used to be, I don't know, banks have changed a lot, used to be that if you went and put money in a savings account, then you could use that, just like you were talking about credit cards, but you can get just a regular loan. Say you had $600 or $1,000 in the bank, in the savings account, and then you could take out a $600 loan against that and then pay that off while they've still got your $600, and you get a monthly report on your bureau that, hey, he's doing good.
Right, and it's similar to that's like an installment loan, similar to the secured credit card. And I always recommend to people try to rebuild that credit afterwards, because what I find is that people who are in a rough financial spot also get hit hard because interest rates on cars are going to be outrageous. Places might not be as willing to rent to you. There are all these impacts that I don't think people always realize that their credit scores, it's the big factor in trying to rebuild that.
We got about 5 minutes, a little less than 5 minutes. So in this last 5 minutes, I really want you to continue on that line and describe to people what they do next after they've left your office and after they've left the court.
So the key is that once someone's made the decision to file, and they should never be embarrassed by it, it really does provide them the opportunity to get their life restarted. And the actions that they take afterwards, need to be different, and that's the taking out some credit to try to help rebuild it. Or if you're not comfortable, don't. Just wait. You know, down the road, a car loan will help with your credit. You know, if you get a home loan, that'll help with your credit.
That's home loan. That's way down there. Right?
Usually about 2 years. If you can show that your credit, you've repaired your credit, 2 years for an FHA-based loan. I think the key for people after a bankruptcy filing is to not get into the same issue. And sometimes it can be controlled, and sometimes people just had bad luck. They got into a bankruptcy because they were in a car accident, or they had co-signed on a vehicle that was taken, you know, by no fault of their own.
They're signed for their son or their daughter or
we
their
see that a lot of
nephew
times with grandparents, and they say, why am I being sued? It wasn't my car. Well,
you signed.
You signed it. And lenders will always say, well, we need a co-signer. We just need a co-signer. And oftentimes people say to me, well, I was the first signer. They were just the co-signer. But in reality, both people are 100% liable. So you just need to be smart about, if you're, you know, don't co-sign on something that you don't have full faith that it's going to work out. Otherwise, you might be putting yourself back in that position.
You might owe for the car that you don't own.
Right. You don't get any benefit from it, and then they can come back after you and start sue you, get a judgment, start a wage garnishment, and that can be devastating.
And then grandpa starts getting, or grandma starts getting those phone calls you were talking about.
Right. And that's, that can be quite stressful.
And have you wound up having to actually file bankruptcy for people like that, or a Chapter 13, or is there something in between that you can do for them short of that bankruptcy?
Of course. So there are situations where people maybe have one debt, whether it be a car deficiency or one single credit card that's been sold. And that's where I also help people settle an account if they've been sued. They may say to me, Andrew, I only have this $8,000 car. If I can get a good deal on settling the debt, maybe I can avoid a bankruptcy. And there are other people who say, I just don't want to file bankruptcy, and they'll look to try to work it out if they're trying to be collected against.
And does that work?
It does. It does with an asterisk, because it kind of depends on whether the person on the other side is willing to work out something.
You mean this other institution?
Correct, whether the lender, or the debt buyer, or the original holder of the debt. And
here in the last 30 seconds, over the last number of years, especially since 2008, local banks have virtually gone away. Used to be you could go in there on a handshake and deal with them, but now you're dealing with banks that are out of other states, right?
Right. I mean, a lot of times everything's kind of changed in that regard. It's not the handshake business that it used to be. Now everything is
contracts.
Correct.
And people you don't know, and people who are not willing to work with you.
Right.
Well, thank you very much. It's been really informative and really quick. I hope people have listened closely to what you have had to say.
Thank you, Lee.
You're very welcome. I've been speaking with Andrew Kirkwood Smith. He is a bankruptcy attorney in St. Louis City?
All St. Louis and the surrounding area in Missouri.
And Illinois too?
Not Illinois, but Missouri.
So a Missouri attorney. So anyways, we're going to upload this to YouTube so that you can show it to friends so that they can get an idea of what to look out for. Thank you very much for being with us. We very much appreciate it. And go to Conversation with Lee Presser on YouTube. Look up my name, Lee Presser, and Andrew Kirkwood Smith, and you will find this show. And we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.